We're one of the largest recruiting organizations in the country and a founding sponsor of the RTOY Award with Dallas HR and one of the largest hosts of Global TA Day in the USA in partnership with ATAP. We're honored to bring industry experts and speakers monthly that focus on sourcing techniques and recruiting and talent acquisition. Be sure to use the chat feature here to put your LinkedIn profile so we can connect and network with each other. I'd like to mention that we have an upcoming speaker next month, so be sure to come back December 2nd. We've got international speaker and author Jerry Crispin. He's going to be presenting on the transformative look at recruiting. So that will definitely be an exciting event also, so be sure to check back. I'd like to thank our sponsors for today's meeting. We got Visage, we've got Hiring Transformed and Divergent Academy. And I'm going to turn it over to Britt with Visage to tell us a little bit about his product. Pat, can you go ahead and take over?
Great, thank you very much, Doug. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, sir.
Great, let me just put it onto presentation. Okay, great. So first of all, thanks everyone. So yeah, I am Patrick Burt. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Visage. I've been with the organization for 2.5 years and I live with my family in Dubai, UAE. So today I'm going to talk about Visage Diversity. So first of all, I wanted to show you the Visage team. So it's a mix of fantastic talent from across 12 countries. And one thing we're really proud of in our efforts is to build a diverse and inclusive workforce. And while this is by no means complete, we know we still have a lot of work to do. It is a significant improvement on 18 months previous when we were a lean startup looking like this, 3 male team members. And I remember this period of time for the indecision and slowdown caused by a lack of diversity within the team. And seriously, we used to come out of product meetings, banging our heads, would have taken 2 steps back. Therefore, with the expansion of the team with over 55% being top female talent, the transformation is amazing. You know, there's so much drive, initiative, and enthusiasm. So this has propelled Visage to record revenue levels in 2020. So at Visage, we understand the benefits of a diverse workforce. And today I want to talk to you about our initiative, which is Visage Diversity. So first of all, for those who are not familiar with Visage, let me give you a quick overview. So we are a recruitment technology platform that works with in-house hiring teams to automate their sourcing and contacting of passive candidates. And how do we achieve this? Well, we use a combination of human intelligence and machine learning technology. So from the human aspect, we use a global community of 4,000 crowdsourcers who are freelance recruiters, and they're based in 65 countries. And they source the profiles on the request of our clientele. So as a recruiter, you post your job on Visage, and our smart technology reviews the needs and assigns a job to domain expert crowdsourcers. They match candidates to the need of the role, and then our machine technology checks the submissions and ensures the profiles are matching your requirements. Then within 24 hours, you have up to 50 candidates that you can review. So you come onto the platform, choose who you want to contact, and within 1 click, connect with your chosen passive candidates using an automated and personal email drip campaign. So you can imagine the time saving, not having to contact dozens of candidates or following up, it's all done for you. So this automated email approach drives passive candidates to engage with you, freeing you up on the high impact parts of your job, such as interviewing and coordinating with line managers. So now let's talk about Visage Diversity. So this initiative came about after several discussions with key clientele, and many had implemented diversity hiring strategies. However, at the top of the recruitment funnel, they were still having ongoing challenges with filling the pipeline with diverse talent, particularly in hard to fill job categories such as technology and higher management roles. So that's why some of the challenges that became clear, and here on the screen you can see these are some of the challenges that were highlighted. For example, TA teams struggling to source diverse candidates, be it for a lack of training or simply not enough time. There's always the issue of unconscious bias during the review and nurture and interview process. There could be too much of a heavy focus on job-seeking candidates, but also bottlenecks that are caused by the time taken to source and nurture talent through the interview stages. So in order to solve these challenges, this is why we created Visage Diversity. So while similar to our crowdsourcing methodology, there are two major changes here. The first is that we assembled a brand new freelance community of diversity sourcers, so specialized diversity sourcers who are skilled in the arts. And we created a full training and development program using some of the industry's top sourcing gurus and created the Visage Diversity Academy. Next thing we did to also remove the bias and to speed up the entire recruitment process, we took the client off the platform and then we put in our Visage sourcing partners, and they're the ones who are responsible for the job posting, the QA, the outreach, and the nurturing of the candidates. So therefore, what you have now is a full top of the funnel process with no action required from your TA team. So prior to any campaign, Visage works with the client to create a strategy that targets the filling of underrepresented job roles with desired diverse candidates. Visage then pulls the agreed jobs from a client's ATS or job page. These jobs go onto the platform where our diversity community will source the profiles. This is where the Visage success partner will then qualify and longlist and reach out to the candidates. And as the people come back interested leads, the success partner will nurture them into applying for the roles through your ATS or directly to your hiring team. So what does this whole process do for you, the client? Well, the whole top of the funnel is taken care of. So your team simply receives warm, diverse applicants applying for your hard to fill roles. You're also receiving the best candidates because we go above and beyond to source and nurture the best top passive talents. Speed is a key here because applicants arrive quickly through the application stages. As our diversity community is globally based, it works 24/7, and you have a dedicated full-time sourcing partner who will be working your roles. And then also we remove a significant amount of unconscious bias. So, because our independent sources will simply source, contact, and nurture candidates based on the suitability to the job requirements. But the final one, and one that I think is a major benefit for any type of campaign like this, is deep analytical data. So we're able to view key metrics throughout the top of the recruitment funnel, including Visage and the client's ATS data. And together, using our Visage data science team to analyze the data, we give a fantastic insight into areas such as the performance of the candidate pipeline, how candidates react to A/B testing of various email outreach, open to lead rates, lead to applicant rates, all these type of metrics we can measure. And then what this will help to do is identify bottlenecks, drop-offs in the application stages, and improve your hiring process as the campaign progresses. So finally, I just wanted to give one example case study of what we're currently doing. So we're currently on a mission with one of our main clients, Siemens, and this is to contact 12,000 female candidates across 6 underrepresented job categories in 6 different countries. So far we've submitted over 300 jobs and actually contacting an average of 1,000 candidates per week. So we're looking good to finish the project well ahead of time. So to summarize, Visage is keen to work with organizations that are passionate about diversity and inclusion and wish to increase hiring in those underrepresented job categories. So our diversity initiative is aimed at creating these long-term partnerships which help you achieve your hiring goals. So thank you for your time. And if anyone's interested in a 20-minute intro call or demo call, then please let me know and we can sort something out. Come book a demo at the website, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you very much.
Doug, you there?
Yeah, David?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Sorry, I was chatting to myself there for a second. Well, I appreciate everybody joining us on the call here today. And Patrick, thank you so much for introducing us to the platform there with Visage. I did want to chat very briefly regarding one of our sponsors, Divergence Academy. They are located here in Dallas. And if you are an organization that is constantly looking to fill your pipeline for entry-level candidates, particularly in the IT space, help desk, desktop support, network engineers, Divergence Academy is actually sort of a very unique boot camp. What they do is they actually take many individuals that come out of the military and retrain them from that perspective into entry-level IT roles, particularly in the cybersecurity space and data analytics areas. Many of them already come out with certifications, with CyberSec certifications, Net Plus, Cloud Plus, A Plus certs as well. Great opportunity to be able to bring on board a vet, certainly helping them out as well. We talk about diversity and inclusion initiatives here today. Great to add to your D&I numbers as well to bring these folks on board. Many of them are Dallas-based. However, with COVID now, the organization has gone nationwide, and therefore there are candidates on a regular basis available that graduate through the program across the country. Classes typically are between 10 to 12 weeks long, and they're regularly graduating new cohorts, as they call them, out there, anywhere between 70 to 80 individuals at any one time. If you're interested in hearing more about Divergence, and again, looking at some initiatives from the IT space and potentially bringing on some veterans, please let me know. Contact me here, and I can get you some more details in regards to Divergence. Now, let's go ahead and officially get started. I know we're all here for the big show, so let's actually chat about our friends, our panel that's here today with us. Let's talk a little bit about them. We've got Melissa Dobbins from Career Place, founder and CEO, Tim Yamada from Toyota Financial Services, Camille Tate from the Beck Group, and then Dustin Pascal, lawyer and founding member from the organization. So welcome panelists, and welcome to everybody that's here joining us. I want to just, before we really kind of get into it and get started, you know, we hear about D&I or DE&I all the time. So really, for folks that may be new to this whole thing, you know, what is D&I for you, right? How do you sort of define it? What's the definition in your space? And kind of let's go around the horn first. Introduce yourself and kind of talk to us a little bit about what is D&I for you.
Do you want to call on people?
Sure, ladies first.
Well, there's two of us.
Well, Melissa, Melissa, let's go ahead and start with you then. I apologize.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Dobbins. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Career.place, and we focus very heavily on the talent acquisition side and removing bias from the hiring process, specifically through structured and anonymous screening technologies. And it's a very interesting question, what is diversity and inclusion? And the reason why I love the question so much is it's so often misunderstood, and the terms are interchanged, and they're not interchangeable terms. So diversity is all about the differences in everybody that you're working with, or whatever it is, that diversity that you're looking at. So it's not a specific type of demographic. It's not trying to fill in with minorities or with people who are marginalized. It is the entire breadth of the individuals that you work with and all of the differences they have demographically, background-wise, socioeconomically, and everything else. That's diversity. Inclusion is making sure every one of their voices is heard, that they are bringing value into the conversations, into the organizations, that they are contributing members and not just tokenized. And then you have other terms that are often used and brought into this conversation as well, such as belonging and equity. Belonging is in making sure everyone is celebrated and feels welcome. So not just that their voice is heard, but their voice is celebrated and they're respected. And equity is making sure that there is fair and equitable treatment. So equal access to training and promotions and all of that other great stuff. And it's all of that together that creates the culture that we're always working towards.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Camille, what about you?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Camille Tate. I'm the Senior Talent Acquisition Manager at the Beck Group. I also host the HR podcast with my sister. It's called the Career Salon with HR Twins, and we talk about this subject matter all the time. Obviously, I am a Black woman, so diversity and inclusion has been a part of my life in corporate America. I've been recruiting for over 15 years. And just to add to Melissa, not to take away, because she had a great definition of what diversity and inclusion is. But I think that diversity and inclusion is the intentional sandbox. It's it's having a place and intentionally welcoming people to that place, attracting people to that place and including them. It's making sure that everyone feels welcome. We all come from different paths, different genders, ethnicities, backgrounds, and experiences. It's bringing your whole self to the table. That's diversity and inclusion, and making sure and ensuring that that whole self is supported, mentored, guided, and set up to be successful wherever you are. So just to add to Melissa's definition, that's, and also I think that diversity and inclusion, they are action words. I think that it's a buzzword, of course, what's going on in our country. It's lovely to say, but it's they are very much action words, which everyone should be responsible for, not just recruiting, not just leadership. Everyone's responsibility is diversity and inclusion.
I like that. Thank you, Camille. I like that term, intentional sandbox. I like that one. Appreciate that. Dustin, welcome.
Yeah, sorry, I had to get myself off mute there.
No problem. No problem. Welcome.
Dustin Pascal. I have an employment boutique law firm, Simon Pascal. My focus is, I think what we've heard from Melissa and Camille are fantastic answers. My focus is a little bit different. Being an employment attorney, my focus is more on kind of the don'ts and the prohibitions in place, and trying to make sure that clients maintain from a legal perspective. Because at least in my world, what's right from a diversity and inclusion or diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective can sometimes be slightly different than what's legally permissible. And so while I encourage my clients and the people I interact with to go above and beyond the legal minimums, at the end of the day, what I'm being paid for by my clients, what I'm being asked about, are the legal minimums. So I kind of focus a little bit differently. And so my focus tends to be more on even treatment. When we start to move out of even treatment with the way we treat our employees with respect to the terms and conditions of their employment, now we have a problem. So we have to focus on, that's kind of where the equitable piece comes in on my side of things, is as long as we're treating our employees equitably with the terms and conditions of employment, then we're complying with the law. But there's some underlying things that come into play, and I can certainly talk about them as we go throughout the day, that sometimes employers, they might be focused on that equitable treatment, but might be violating the law unknowingly in some other areas. So that's kind of where my focus goes.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. I think there's sometimes we highlight D&I, but then we forget the E part, right? The equity piece of it as well. So I know in some of the presentations we've seen DEI or D and I. Some people kind of interchange them together. From your perspective, are they the same?
Yeah, I think the problem is, at least from what I have seen, when there was a focus on diversity and inclusion, the focus, at least in my experience and what I saw, was more on expanding our hiring and our recruiting and very positive things that we should be doing, but not necessarily a focus on the treatment of the employees once they were in the workplace, which both Melissa and Camille referenced. And I think that's where the kind of the E comes into play, or has come into play more, is, okay, you've done the good work of diversifying your recruiting and your hiring and things like that. But now once you have your workforce, you are not treating all of your employees equitably within that workforce. And I think that's where the E kind of has started to grow and expand in people's minds.
Good point. I like that. I like that. That's a great way. E stands for existing employees as well. I like that. Okay, great. And Tim, I haven't forgotten about you. Please introduce yourself and tell us kind of, how do you define what is D&I for you from your perspective?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Tim Yamada with Toyota Financial Services, and I'm actually the manager of Supplier Diversity. So I'm not a D&I expert, but I've been around long enough. So hopefully my remarks touch on what I've experienced and observed and practiced over the years. And similar to Melissa and Camille and what Dustin said, I don't want to reiterate exactly what they said, but it's definitely an intentional and chosen behavior. And I think in companies, it's really a culture that evolves and grows over time. I think you've heard, you can attract all the diversity you want, but I think if you bring them into a diverse environment that isn't inclusive, you may lose those folks, or you may lose what you already have. So diversity alone doesn't create inclusion. Inclusion is really about creating belonging and connection and participation and contribution. So so I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, from what I'm gathering, the D, the E, and the I, they're all very much important, and they all are very relative to each other. You cannot silo them individually. They all are very interdependent on each other. So now that we've got a kind of a baseline definition as far as kind of the understanding for it, our audience is made up of a lot of different organizations, big companies, small companies, in between, solo practitioners as well. So let's talk a little bit about kind of building this out. We hear about it, now we know about it. There's definitely actionable items that people can do. I'm curious sort of from your organizations, and again, we'll kind of round robin it as well, how do you build out this network of diverse candidates, right? What are the sort of methods maybe that your organizations are generating to get to those diverse candidates? Because that's a big piece of it, right? Is, okay, we want to do it, but I don't know how to do it, or where should I go to find it? So I'm curious, Melissa, we can start with you, and then I'll kind of highlight the other folks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll throw out a few ideas. I know there's going to be a lot more coming as we continue that round robin. But when it comes to the sourcing piece, so not the screening, not making sure there's equity in the opportunity and getting those positions, but just simply filling that top of the funnel with as much diversity and breadth of candidates as possible, there are a few things that you can do to find those candidates. One of them is, we talk about reaching out to various institutions, for instance, historically Black colleges, and looking at not just the universities, but also the state schools, the community colleges, any type of educational institution. They all will come with their own demographic distribution. So when you reach out to those institutions, look at those demographic distributions. You're going to inherit those. Organizations like you were talking about, David, just before we started this conversation, are fantastic, that focus on specific groups like veterans and getting them prepped for positions. Goodwill is another one that's in a lot of different communities that are prepping individuals for access to jobs. So taking the time to understand what those educational institutions are to actively go out to. And don't just assume because you've got them in front of the eyeballs that those eyeballs are going to respond. Talk to them. What are those individuals, those students who are coming out of these educational institutions or who are employed by these similar or comparable industries? What are they looking for in a job? What are they going to gravitate towards? What is important to them? And make sure when you're interacting with them, when you're starting that recruitment process, that you're not showing them what you want to tell them. You're conveying what they need to hear. And that's another piece, so that you're not just getting to them, you're drawing them in. I would also recommend look across the community for other advocacy organizations. Usually you have within chambers of commerce, for example, a lot of different groups. You'll have government organizations that cater to different groups and getting that access. So the more that you can diversify where you are getting both your active and your passive candidate pool, the more you're going to get that flow, and make sure when you're doing that, that you're also resonating with those individuals. You're not just using the same message that you've been using over here over and over again and hoping somebody else is going to click the apply button, right? Know what they care about, know what's going to resonate with them, know what is not going to resonate with them. And you brought up a great, that group with veterans, for example. They have a lot of fantastic skills, but they don't necessarily call them the same things when they're in the military. So people coming right out of the military, you might be some translation layers that are required to make sure they understand what you're looking for, and they can self-identify if they meet those needs, if they're going to thrive in that environment.
Gotcha. Super. Now, Camille, I know you're kind of in the thick of it as a TA manager, senior TA manager yourself there for the BET group. So I'm sure with your podcast as well, I'm sure you can probably speak the entire time on it, but I'm kind of curious, highlighting sort of for organizations that are looking to build this out, where do you find these folks? How do you build out that network of diverse candidates?
Right. And I'm kind of like piggybacking off of Melissa. She has some great ideas and things that we do it here at the BET group. I'm a proud HBCU graduate. And so we definitely have a pipeline and relationships in that effect, relationships with veterans and all of those things. One thing I want to highlight that people forget about when it comes to TA, because we have so much technology, I think that technology kind of cripples some recruiters in some aspects. Recruiters kind of depend on solely technology to kind of sort out and find candidates for them. When I started recruiting, it was all about relationships. It was all about smiling and dialing and going to lunches, going to breakfasts, actually getting to know candidates. And I know Michael, he talks about the candidate experience all the time, that people forget that when they think about diversity recruiting efforts. It's about the candidate experience. That is so important to build those relationships, talk to people, even people, when I started recruiting, I felt like I was getting people that were like out of work and people that nobody wanted, right? But I found success having conversations and getting to know those candidates and actually being able to sell those candidates to my hiring managers, which is how I found success at the beginning to now of my career. Sometimes recruiters and TA professionals, we have to take it back old school. It's not, I'm behind a computer and I'm letting software do the work for me. It's going back to the basics. That's how you put together grassroots efforts to adequately recruit diverse professionals, is, building relationships, building a pipeline. I know for architecture and construction, the landscape that I'm in, we have less than 9% women in the whole entire industry. We have less than 3% African Americans, the whole entire industry. So just for me and my team to sit behind a computer and say, we're going to let software determine who our candidates are, we can't do that. We would never be successful. We have to kind of do those things that Melissa said. Even the people that may not be a fit right now, they may be a fit in the future. So build your pipelines, make sure you're keeping in touch with candidates, and go back old school. That's how you're going to get diverse candidates, by really getting to know the people that you recruit and where they've come from, so that you can position them to be successful and interview and get a position with your company.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate that, Camille. Yeah. Tim or Dustin, any additional thoughts? I know this is kind of more sort of the tactical, operational stuff from a recruiting side, whereas you guys do something a little bit different, but any additional thoughts from your end on sort of building out those teams and sort of finding candidates?
I would just say, kind of to piggyback on the others is, I think corporations definitely know what they're looking for. So if you can try to highlight or understand and try to learn the unique strengths of the candidates, I think that definitely helps too.
Yeah, I gotcha. Super. Now, I'm curious. We're talking about it right now. There's a lot of job posts, especially over the last few months. We've seen a big spike in a lot of D&I positions. I personally have seen all kinds of senior leadership positions. There's definitely diversity and inclusion recruiter roles, manager positions for different organizations, even mid-sized and smaller ones. The thought is, these positions should have been maybe created lots lots of years ago, a long time ago, or whatnot. Any thoughts from anyone here on the panel as far as kind of around this big spike? Is it just because of kind of what's going on in the country right now, or is it more of just kind of an awareness, getting woke, so to speak, to stuff like this?
That's a really, really good question. And that trend is both promising and I would say with cautious optimism. I do think there's a lot of reactionary piece to it. There are a lot of organizations that already had D&I officers, D&I or DEI leadership, and that's fantastic, and they're continuing to invest in that. Others are a little bit more new to the game. There is also a lot of, and we talk about it in a few different flavors, talk rather than action. Camille brought that up several times already because it's so prevalent. So when looking at positions like that, or considering posting positions like that, I recommend looking for three things, and it's critical for both sides. You want to make sure the position has influence, it has power, and it has money. And that will tell the difference between one that might be more of a figure type of position, or they're not quite sure what they're going to do with it yet, and hopefully the person who comes in will figure it out, versus one where there's some real initiative behind it. So does that individual have budget? Can they actually execute against plans? Can they put things in place? Do they have influence? Because positions like that generally have very small teams and have to influence across the organization, right? They're influencing HR and talent acquisition and operations and hiring managers and everybody else to do things that are more inclusive, that bring in more diversity, that create a better belonging. So do they have that influence, or every time they have an idea, there's like, oh, that's great, and then pushed aside again, which happens quite a bit, unfortunately. And then do they have power? Do they have direct ability to make decisions and to move forward with their actions and their initiatives? Mm-hmm. So if you can't find that combination, if they don't have the ear of the C-suite or the executive levels, if you don't see clear ways that they've got the influence, if you don't see a budget associated, and it's just like, well, we'll figure it out. That means take a closer look. And unfortunately, that's not something that's new, because you'll see it. A lot of these D&I leadership positions, they'll rotate. So they have a longevity between 1 and 3 years, because people will come in, they'll have all these fantastic ideas. They'll spend the first year building it all up, the second year realizing they can't get any of it done. And then by the third year, they're moving on and trying to find someplace else that's really going to celebrate what they're trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And so because we see this happening already, we know that that's a challenge. So for anyone who's either posting or considering those types of roles, they can be amazing, but make sure you're asking the right questions of your hiring team and or of the employer that you're considering.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate that. Camille, any thoughts as well from your end as far as kind of seeing the big influx of all these new DEI positions?
Yeah, I'm seeing the trend and the in-mails on LinkedIn, and
right.
Organizations are so far behind. But yes, it's a new energy because of everything that's going on in our communities, in our worlds, and organizations. They just need to come clean, start from scratch. Let's admit your wrongs, admit your lack of transparency, and say, hey, we're trying to do better. But to have, be trendy and have a chief diversity officer, diversity inclusion director, and say, look, we have a Black person now. They're our diversity and inclusion officer, and then have them be the face of your lack of innovation in previous years. That's not fair. Minorities and people of color can do other things than be director or chief diversity officers. And that's the point, right? You have a person of color as a chief diversity officer, yet your whole board of directors, your whole leadership group, right. Not one person of color, not one woman, all of these things. And so it's a moot point to have a diversity, person of color when nobody else looks like them. Right. And then you don't give them money, you don't give them free reign to kind of build programs and do what they need to do to make the culture and the environment a better place for everyone. And mm-hmm. So I applaud the companies that have general, good intentions for hiring these positions, but it's basically companies. If you've been lacking in that area, I just say come clean and say, hey, this has not been our strong suite. We're going to be transparent. We're trying to do better. But after so long that we're trying to do better for the second year, the third year, the fourth year, that is kind of
It's almost like window dressing, right? Like,
Yes,
look at us,
absolutely.
look at us. We have this Latin person. We have this
Yes,
Latin person.
absolutely.
We have
It's
this
time for,
lesbian person, that kind
yeah.
of thing. Yeah.
It's time for companies to be real and come clean, because guess what? I have friends and colleagues from all walks of life. And when they're looking for job opportunities, if there's no one that looks like them, if they don't see transparency, if they don't see an inclusive environment, they're not interested. They're not interested at all. They're not interested in being gaslit into opportunities that will eventually lead to their demise in their career, because the company is not intentional about why they intended to hire that person. So, companies need to step it up, because candidates are getting the upper hand when it comes to diversity and inclusion and what they would consider as a reasonable company to work for. So it's imperative that companies step their game up.
No, I agree 100%. From a legal perspective, I'm curious, we've got, certainly we've got a lawyer here on the line with us. Are there any new trends? We see that there's a trend, obviously, upward from a hiring perspective. Do you see any trends from the lawsuits that are coming through? Is the EEOC handing down new doctrine or new rulings that organizations should be aware of now?
Not so much a trend from the EEOC, but what I see, and it kind of plays into the topic you all were just talking about, and these new, somewhat new DE&I directors and officers and things. I think where that comes into play is what I would say in terms of trends. And to Camille's point and Melissa's point, you've got to empower these people. The way I would empower them from a legal perspective is I compare it to myself. When I get hired as a new employment attorney for a client, the first thing I do is go in and do an audit top to bottom of all of their employment practices to figure out what they're doing that might be in violation of the law so that we can correct it moving forward. I think the way you empower these newly hired DE&I officers is say, I need you first thing, do a top to bottom audit of the company and tell us where we're lacking, where we're problematic, where you see holes, because that's the whole point. That's the whole reason that you brought them on. And the other idea being they see things differently. They experience things differently, whether, doesn't matter education wise. I have lived a different life than Camille has lived. We see things differently. We have experienced things differently. And so I think what you get there is you need that person to do that audit and kind of figure out where you're going top to bottom. A comparison I would make is, I sit on a nonprofit board and very diverse in terms of age and gender and things like that, but realized about a year ago, this board is 100% white. And the problem is we aren't able to see problems because we don't experience them. And so we immediately focused on diversifying from a race perspective, the board, and added 3 new minority board members. Well, the first thing we did was created a new website. As we're displaying the new website for the board, one of the new board members said, hey, I just realized all of the stock photos on the website are all white people. There's no minorities in any of the stock photos. And it wasn't something intentional that our board did to exclude minorities from the stock photos in the website. It's just, again, right or wrong, you view things differently and you see things differently, and some things stand out to you and some things don't. And so that's why I think these DE&I officers have to come in and do a top to bottom audit of what you're doing and what you're not. Because particularly, and this kind of circles back to your question about trends, while there's not necessarily a trend in the way the EEOC is enforcing, there is an uptick in cases out there on disparate impact. And I kind of referenced that at the very beginning, is you might not be intentionally discriminating based on race or gender or age or whatever it may be. But if you're doing things that have a disparate impact on a minority group, that is discrimination, whether you had the purest of intentions. And where that comes into play, particularly for this group a lot, is, onboarding in terms of, as you recruit, testing. And do you have a test that you use for your candidates that's having a disproportionate negative impact on minorities? And if you do, And if it falls into a certain, they have a test that you can do, a test for the tests. But if it does, then you are now engaging in discrimination under federal law. Whether you designed that test to do that or not, you're doing it. And so where you can use those new DE&I folks is to come in and say, okay, it looks like this test, when I go back and look at the historical records of this test, you are disproportionately filtering out minority applicants with this test. And so I think this test is having a disparate impact on minorities, and you are engaging in discrimination under the law, and we have to fix that. So that's why that audit is so important to kind of come in and do that. And that's where I'm seeing trending in the area of kind of both gender and racial discrimination, but primarily racial discrimination is in this area of disparate impact.
Gotcha. And I keep hearing the same thought around leadership as well. Tim, from your perspective, especially from the diversity supplier side, what advice do you have as far as educating the leadership to committing to diversity, whether it's with suppliers or with individuals?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I would say specifically educating leadership, it's really more of a general statement, because while training helps, I think from what I've observed, I think the effort really needs to be on trying to move the inclusion needle, if you will. So, as I mentioned, having a diverse work group, but if they're not in an inclusive environment, then maybe you're not getting to where you want to go. And the other thing is, intentional is a very key word today. We can do things that we think are intentional and are moving the needle, but if it's doing things that maybe are just making us feel good, it may feel like progress, but it may not be impacting inclusion in the way we want to. So, just a few things that I, have read and observed with regards to maybe 3 attributes that might help move the inclusion needle, or trying to have more inclusive meetings, try to include, everybody in the discussion, being able to hear what they say, whether it might be wrong or right or indifferent, having executives that maybe are fair and equitable and welcoming, and leaders and managers who understand their team members' unique strengths, I think would all help in an effort to try to move the inclusion needle, if you will.
Gotcha. I'm curious, what's been the biggest success factors for Toyota? You're there right now. Toyota, very large organization. I'm assuming very, very diverse as well in terms of their employer base, in terms of their suppliers. What are you seeing as far as kind of the big success stories that they're doing?
Yeah, for us, I talked about culture at the onset. We have 2 pillars. One is respect for people, and one is continuous improvement. And respect for people is really the culture that we live by every day. We try to include people every day, and it is a top-down effort from not only Akio, but all of our senior leaders, VPs, etc., in trying to lead this effort for D&I. So it's an ingrained culture. I'm not saying that we're perfect. We have some areas that we definitely are trying to improve. So from a supplier diversity perspective, we just continue to try to diversify our supply chain so that when we're building cars, it's inclusive of not only what our team members look like, but also what our communities look like, where we live, work, and play.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. You know, Dustin touched upon something, and it was one of my questions that I had up here, and it was messaging, right? We see kind of the websites. You talked about how there wasn't a diverse group of in your photos, in the stock photos. It was, you know, it was all male white people in there. Is there and should there be a diverse messaging when it comes to attracting more diverse workforce? And Camille, we can start with you.
Yes.
Okay.
Like I mentioned, like transparency is the key. It is the key. Like I said, you know, I have colleagues and from all walks of life, and you know, companies need to be transparent. Companies need to, not to say that every little thing you do, but you need to have a plan in place, and you need to show people how you're tracking in that plan. I mean, it's, you know, people can, you know, during, you know, people are donating money to the NAACP, you know, back in the summer, and to this organization and that organization, and putting up Black squares on social media. That's fine. But what are your actions? What plans do you have in place? What steps have you been making towards this whole social media plan or blitz that you had out in the summertime? What are you doing now? That's what we want to know. And so when you're thinking about diverse candidates and the climate that we're in now, yes, of course they're looking, they want to know. And if you haven't gotten these questions from candidates already, candidates are asking about, they're asking about numbers. They're asking about what your culture is like. They're asking about the diversity and inclusiveness of your culture. You have to, even if you don't have it out on a website, recruiters and hiring managers need to be armed with that information and be able to speak to it in a genuine way. And that's how you know, because most people, let's be honest, in my career, most people, they want passive candidates, right? They don't want candidates that are actively on the market. Unfortunately, that's been like a trend since I've been recruiting over 15 years. So if you want passive talent and you're saying, hey, we want you to come from your current job to our company, and it's a diverse candidate, why should they leave their current company to come to you? Mm-hmm. So part of that being transparent, that's important. And you should be able to lay out that information at a moment's notice and be well versed on it, and also be able to speak to it and engage in that process so that you're able to communicate it to candidates.
Gotcha. Is Beck in particular, since you're at Beck, are they doing anything specific that a candidate can go out to and see that there's particular D&I messaging? You know, let's say on the website.
We have D&I messaging, okay. We have videos, we have blog posts, all of those things. I mean, I don't know, Dallas folks might know our CEO, Fred Propal. He's on the Dallas Citizens Council. He's very active in the community. He talks about this subject matter all the time. He talks about our environment. And we, you know, as I mentioned earlier, as an industry, architecture and construction started below the bottom of diversity and inclusion. I mean, the bottom. And so we've had a long way to go to kind of retrain that narrative of, you know, everybody thinks of architecture and construction as the good old boys and things like that. We have to start from scratch and redirect that and build a diverse culture and organization. And he's really, you know, has been talking about that. And even this week, we do town halls internally. He's talked about it several times. There are videos and messaging out there. So he tries to be as transparent as possible. People ask him about it all the time. I mean, he's the CEO of the Beck Group. We're a $1 billion plus company. He's only one of 2 minorities on the top 100 general contractors. So, you know, it is important, and he speaks about it publicly all the time.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear that it's not just a website thing, that it's actually your senior leadership, the top, right? The top of the top, right? The CEO that's actually involved and actually engaged in doing it as well. So that's great to hear. Melissa, Tim, or Dustin, any thoughts around kind of the messaging piece? And as far as, you know, should that messaging change specifically for attracting D&I, whether it's from a supplier perspective or candidates as well?
Yeah, to Camille's point, and I'm a big fan of transparency, and Honesty, it's got to be genuine. If it's not genuine, everyone's going to see right through it. So don't put up a message because it sounds good or what you think it should be, or you kind of have that intention as long as there isn't a bigger priority. That's not diversity and inclusion. That's certainly not diversity and inclusion messaging. That is fluff. I'm a huge fan of show and not tell. Don't tell me you're doing things. Show me you're doing things. So one easy way that you can do this right now, anyone can start putting some of this show me messaging, is thinking about benefits. So if you think about the talent acquisition process, about engaging with your candidates, there is a lot of questions candidates will have that they might not be comfortable asking you about. Consider women who might be starting a family or who have just started a family. They're not going to ask you about maternity leave. They're going to think you're going to jump to the wrong conclusion. And it's now as part of that conversation, which I'm sure Dustin can talk to, could put you in some interesting hot water. So you don't want to have that. Prayer rooms, making sure you have access to the right kind of health care and your family can have access. Do you have support for same-sex couples? Things like that. What is your bathroom policies like? What are your travel policies like? There are all sorts of things when it comes to benefits and policies that people can be very interested in. If you just show, here is what I do, don't make anybody ask. They can just look on your website and see what your maternity and paternity policies are, what your policies are for supporting families of all types. All family things, prayer rooms, where you can store your insulin, like any of those types of things, proactively show that not only do you have these benefits, but you are thinking of everybody, that you're thinking through these different angles of accessible bathrooms and gender neutral bathrooms, that you're thinking through the angles of what it is to demand travel or not to, or what happens when your kid gets sick or is now in quarantine with COVID, like my children are in there, and I'm very much hoping they don't start making a lot of noise. So by doing something like that, you are showing diversity and inclusion. You are showing, I am thinking of you, I've got you covered. And you're doing it in a way that's as subtle and effective as having pictures of diverse people working together, a diversity of engagement versus pictures of an all-white organization, and then saying, come work for us, we're diverse. You're like, right? So something like that can make a big difference. So to Camille's point, you want it to be transparent. You want it to be genuine, and as much show and not tell as possible. Show me those programs, show me those benefits, show me you know who I am, and I am going to be welcome and celebrated here.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. Dustin or Tim, any additional thoughts around the kind of messaging piece for trying to attract the D&I suppliers or candidates as well? Maybe from a legal perspective, are there any legal pitfalls that companies should be aware of as far as the messaging is concerned? Pushing something out that maybe shouldn't be out there, or just the gotchas or the ahas?
Yeah, the only thing I ever think about with messaging, and I think it's important to preface it with, to Melissa's point, show not tell. I mean, make sure you're actually doing it. Don't just put it there to protect yourself. But what I always look at from a messaging perspective, when you're looking at it from a legal perspective, is all those messaging pieces are used in any potential litigation to bolster a case. So if someone's going to allege discrimination, what they're going to do is pull images and statements on your website and say, look, here, this bolsters my allegation that they are engaging in discrimination. What they're going to pull for those that have sway with your companies to talk about officers and boards of directors, one of the main things they often do is go pull the about us and say, look, here's your leadership team. Every single one of them is white. And so when I'm alleging that you're engaging in race discrimination, this bolsters my claim. Now, that is not in and of itself going to establish a discrimination allegation and in court, but those pieces of evidence are used against you. And so that's why messaging is important. I don't want you to do messaging just so you have evidence that you can point to try to defend yourself. You need to actually do it, as Melissa's talking about, and Camille has spoken about as well. But the messaging is important in that regard.
Gotcha. I hear you. Tim, any additional thoughts on that one?
I'll come at it from a supplier diversity perspective. Yeah, and I think a lot of it is from within the buying units themselves, rather than, sticking or using their incumbent supplier, try to include an MBE or a WBE, but have it be a concentrated effort. Don't just do it because, oh, we included them, but now maybe they, that particular supplier didn't provide the best quality or the best cost. But be intentional about it. And more importantly, if they don't happen to win that bid, give them the feedback that they need so that they can try to be successful the next time, whether it's with our company or any other company. So help them learn and grow, even if they maybe weren't successful in that particular bid.
Gotcha. And I'm curious on that as well. You mentioned MBEs or WBEs. Do you ever get called out to say, hey, we want to ensure that there is a minority supplier involved? Is that the mindset for companies like yours, where you say, you know what, we've got 100 potential suppliers, but we really need to have a diversity supplier in place? Like, does that become sort of the overarching reason to pick one over the other?
I guess the short answer is yes. We do make a concerted effort to include minority MBEs or WBEs in any particular sourcing event. So it is something that we definitely strive for in every event.
Good. I think that from our audience perspective, it's great to hear that, because there's a lot of organizations, like I mentioned, we've got small companies here, single source companies also. And some of them can be MBEs or WBEs, and having sort of that certification, because there is a long process, I know, in the state of Texas for that. It does go a long way. It's great to know that companies do actually look out for that and target those types of organizations as well. So appreciate that piece. It's interesting. I got a question that came through on our chat, and it kind of made me think about something as we were talking about different topics. I'm old enough to remember ERGs, employee resource groups, where they had like the Hispanic or the Latino banking group, or the Black banking group, because I used to work in banking back in the day. And there were always these different individuals, the Asian group or whatnot, type of thing. I'm curious, is that still something that's happening? Is it coming back in again? I was kind of growing up in the late 90s, kind of in my career, and I remember seeing a lot of those things pick up in the early 2000s as well. It seems to be coming back. Your thoughts on it, panel? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Does it create segregation necessarily by having those different groups, or does it actually foment more of an education and awareness within your company? I'm opening it up to anyone.
So yes and yes. It's funny, like everything else, you can sometimes have the double-edged sword challenge. So on the one hand, groups can create more segregation. It is great to have an affinity group that gives you that safety. I can just be me. I don't need to explain myself. I don't need to explain to you why I'm having this challenge, because I know everyone here is somewhat gets it on the same wavelength, probably have experienced something similar before. And that is a really nice place to have that safety, especially with companies that are still in the early stage of evolving into more inclusive places where you're going to have those. It's also great for amplifying the voice. It's very difficult to put people in a situation where they are the voice of, and then whatever your demographic is, or whatever your concern is, or what that conversation is. So having that power of others who support you, who have you back, who not only have your back, but are adding and amplifying that voice, and being able to bring that up and articulating that to the organization is all very, very powerful. What becomes detrimental is if people are always kind of going back to their own little corners, and you start using that as an excuse, not as a tool to wield for more inclusion and for understanding, but instead, just go back to your group and talk about it amongst yourselves, type of things, and you kind of shove people aside and you start getting that segregation aspect of it. A nice simple test to know if you may or may have that problem is when you are in the same location, COVID aside, look at your lunchroom. How are people sitting? If they're all sitting in their affinity groups, you've got a problem, right? If people are mixing and they're sitting because of something else, that's showing that you're going to be in a healthy state. What I would recommend is if you have or are creating or are evolving affinity groups or the like, think about what their purpose is and make sure they've got the strong mission statement. Is their purpose to affect change and bring up issues and make sure that the groups that they represent are able to convey those thoughts and affect change? If so, fantastic, make sure there are outlets to do that. Is it more to have a safe place, to have fun, to have conversations with people who are like-minded? If so, fantastic, but then think about different alternatives. Like a group that I might be super interested in is the Star Wars hyperfan group, and start expanding those affinity groups into things that can allow for more cultural and inclusion mixing of everybody from all sorts of different places who share something in common that they can enjoy, knitting or Star Wars or football or whatever it is.
Gotcha. Camille, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, ERGs, it depends, right? Because I agree with Melissa, it can be to a company's detriment. I see both. I've seen ERGs, and I think that ERGs or affinity groups, I don't really like calling them ERGs, more affinity groups I see them more in like the larger global organizations where you have like 60, 70,000 employees and you need those groups. But I'll put it like this. I'm a member of a large church, right? Very large church. And there's no way that our leadership can wrap everyone and make everyone feel included personally. So if an affinity group in a company, well, we have small groups or life groups. So if an affinity group in a large organization came from that perspective where, hey, we can't get to everyone, we want everyone to feel included, and we want to use these affinity groups to show, hey, we're being inclusive, but also open those affinity groups to anyone who'd like to join, yes. But I'm more so of a fan. I've been on I used to work for Match.com. So we had the culture committee where you had everyone, every ethnicity, gender, all those veterans, all these people on one committee. And it was a rotational team. Everybody got an opportunity to be selected for the culture committee. And we all worked together to put on events and to create a culture that worked for everyone. And it was an inclusive decision-making process. And we also kind of have that here at Beck. We have it Beck Better Together, where we do training. We do everything from a diversity and inclusion standpoint for everyone. Everybody's welcome to give feedback. Everybody's welcome to participate and say what they need to say. And obviously, I'm not the director of diversity and inclusion at Beck, but we have one, and I'm very vocal, as you can see, about this subject matter. So I have the platform to say, hey, we need to do this for women, or we need to do this, so having a place where you can go. But we are more of a mid-sized company, so I can see affinity groups as long as they are being inclusive and not excluding anyone. If someone wants to be a part of the African American network in a large global company, let them. I mean, it's no problem. So that's where I kind of am on affinity groups and culture committees, things like that.
Appreciate that. And Dustin, just from again, going back from the legal perspective, have there been any challenges that you've heard of for affinity groups or the old school ERGs, or any sort of changes the company should be aware of if they want to create them?
Something that's like a per se thing. I was going to say what gives me cause for concern. I see the pluses and the minuses both ways, just as Camille and Melissa have outlined. I tend to prefer affinity groups based around things that are not gender, race, things like that, just because I find that companies that aren't prepared culturally, like they don't have the right workplace culture, they start to use those as a crutch and say, okay, well, we have the ERGs or the affinity groups, and they almost try to force people into them. Okay, you're Black, you need to go into this affinity group. You're Latinx, you need to go into this affinity group, and it becomes the lazy company's way to try to solve their diversity problem. and all it ends up creating is more problems, because now you are trying to, in effect, segregate or create groups and force them into something that they may not necessarily want to be in. So I always have a point of hesitation with ERGs in that sense. I prefer them to be more driven by interests.
Gotcha.
Or to Camille's point, a culture one, or workplace hiring type of group that's going to focus on that. I prefer them that way rather than by some immutable characteristic. The other thing that's interesting to note from a legal perspective is, once you create the affinity group, now, I mean, if we talk about the National Labor Relations Act, I'm not going to dive into that because that's not what we're here for, but the law has become much more clear lately that that protection for employees becomes, even in non-union union environments, when two or more employees together challenge the workplace conditions, that's now considered protected concerted activity, and those employees are cloaked with protection under the National Labor Relations Act. So if you create these affinity groups and they are coming up with ideas, so to speak, for the workplace, they're now challenging their workplace conditions, and there's two or more of them. So now that group has some protection under the National Labor Relations Act that they might not otherwise have had. They might have had it, but they might not otherwise have had it, and you've now cloaked them with it. So I hesitate with those affinity groups, and I like them to be more, like I said, focused on interests.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. Appreciate the insight. And Tim, I'm just curious, from the supplier side, do things like that exist where there are these sort of affinity groups from the supplier end as well that you have to be aware of, or companies should be aware of?
You know what? Not necessarily from a supplier perspective. We obviously have spend goals and things like that, and obviously there we have some very strategic suppliers where it doesn't make sense to maybe replace them or supplant them with a minority-owned business, but we do what we can in every effort to try to diversify our supply chain. Okay. I will say from an affinity group, in an attempt to try to move that inclusive needle, as I talked about before, you may have folks in your company, I guess you could call them detractors, right? So within their own departments for their day-to-day jobs, they might not be very happy. They might talk negatively about the group or the company, but when they get into that infinity group, they change because it's a safe place for them. They're more comfortable. And so, that being said, in an attempt to move that inclusion needle, if you can try to find a baseline of maybe who those folks are after they come out of that affinity group and start doing their day-to-day, then try to move those folks from an enterprise-wide perspective, from being a detractor, if you will, to maybe more of a promoter and feeling more inclusive. So, don't really have an opinion one way or another, whether they're good or bad, or whether they're, a cause separation or not. But I think it could be used as a tool, I guess is my point.
Gotcha. Good
David, I have one more thing to add to kind of piggybacking on Tim. What I meant to say earlier was sometimes an affinity group or an ERG can be, like he mentioned, some people, certain groups, they don't feel included at work. Right? They don't feel included. They don't feel like they can be their whole selves at work. They don't feel like they can have an opinion and all of these things. And so when companies start affinity groups or ERGs, you have people that stick together because that's really the only place they can be themselves. And so if that happens in an organization, that's a leadership and culture issue that is root cause. And you need to look at that aside from creating more and more affinity groups and ERG, that's a Band-Aid over the real issue of people not feeling like they can bring their whole selves to work and be themselves. They might feel like they might be retaliated against or something if they had an opinion on certain things. So really ERGs, kind kind of why I'm not a fan of them. They are a result of a company not really listening to their employees and being inclusive in their culture.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. I know I got a ton of other questions, and I want to be respectful of all the time and of the panel here as well. I want to jump into, we've talked about kind of the messaging, sourcing candidates. At the end of the day, we've got to figure out, is it worth it? Are we getting the value? Is there the ROI on stuff like this? So metrics, it's important. We certainly do a lot of metrics and metrics management in talent acquisition, in HR, right? Organizations, of course, have their own metrics to ensure that they're being successful at what they're doing. So how do you measure D&I? Whether it's from the supplier side or from an employee perspective or from bringing in your funnel. I'm curious, again, open to the panel, how do you all measure the success of these initiatives that we've been talking about today?
Isn't that just the million, billion, or whatever your metric goals are question? So metrics are a really, really interesting challenge, because what is valuable changes not just by organization, but by individual within the organization. So when you're thinking about metrics, one of the first things to think about is metrics for who? Who are you talking to? Who is it that you need to make your case for, that you have this return on investment in all of these efforts? Because your C-level, your CEO or your COO that you're working with is going to be totally different than your HR executive, which is going to be totally different than what you're going to present from a marketing standpoint, such as what your diversity numbers are. So you're actually managing multiple metrics based on what is being valued. So the more you know what is being valued, the more compelling your conversation is going to be. So that being said, there's different families of metrics to think about. There are the metrics of basic talent acquisition performance, quantity and quality of candidates coming in, what the diversity of those candidates look like at the beginning, at the top of the funnel, all the way down to hiring. Because you're going to have, if you're working on diversity initiatives, it probably means you don't have the diversity that you think you should. So knowing where your problem is all around those metrics. You got to know who's clicking the apply button, who those passive candidates are coming in, all the way down to which ones are being hired and where you might be pinching those demographics along the way. As a side note, from a protection standpoint, from a legality standpoint, as much as you can separate the demographics from the individual, do not give the demographics of the individual to the hiring manager as they're reviewing. Keep those completely separate. So you've got the data on a macro level, but the individuals as anonymous as possible, so there isn't any perceived or real influence of that data to the decision-making process. So that's one side of the metrics that I'm a big fan of quality, not just quantity. It's not the number of candidates coming in, it's how many of those candidates are great, how many of those candidates are truly qualified and could be a great add to the organization. And then retention on the back end, how many of those candidates that you're hiring are resonating with and staying with the organization. I know TA does not have total control over that, but it is a nice indicator of, am I at least doing my piece of it? It doesn't necessarily mean if it's not going well, that it is TA's fault. Gotcha. So, but it's a good metric. On the diversity side, it's all about that, the different sides of the demographics coming in and going through the process of who you're attracting in terms of demographic, who you're engaging. If you do have fallout, why? So being able to say, hey, I have a problem. I only have people under the age of 40 here, which is common among, let's say, startup tech communities. So what's happening? And then it could be you've got a great distribution all the way until you get to those in-person screening conversations, and suddenly everybody over the age of 40 disappears. Now you know what your problem is. Right. And you can use those metrics and turn them into action.
Gotcha.
The last thing that I would say about metrics is a cautionary piece. We are change agents. Diversity, equity, inclusion means we are trying to get to a different and better tomorrow than we are today. So we do not want our metrics to reflect a better today, right? So if you are trying to gain the true value of diversity and inclusion and equity and belonging, it means your teams are going to be capable of doing things that they can't even think about today because there aren't the right people on the team to have those thoughts. So we can't hold them to today's standards. So when you're looking at metrics in terms of, well, I value people who are really good at math, great, but what is your team not doing today and start valuing that. Because if you can measure against where you want to be tomorrow instead of how you're doing today, you're going to be much, much more effective in showing the true return on that investment for diversity. You can show that if we stop thinking about the problem the same way, then we're going to gain that much more capability. And I'll give you a very quick example so I don't dominate too much of the time. But I was talking with a good friend of mine who leads recruiting for a publishing house, for a large publishing house. And they've got diversity initiatives, but he has a problem because they're just numbers. And if you look at the requirements and what they're looking for and what success is and all that other stuff that he's using to recruit, it's exactly the same as it was yesterday. So what they really wanted, to be totally honest, is they wanted people of color to do exactly the same thing as the predominantly white female staff. Everything the same. And I was like, so what exactly are you accomplishing just by changing the numbers and not by changing the value of the outcome? And he took this lean back and had that uh-oh moment.
Yeah, that can happen.
So if you started thinking about it, well, what about your readership? If you're trying to engage with readers that are more diverse, I want more people of colors. I want more Black women and Latinx, and I want more people of different age groups reading, because that is my lifeblood, our readers, because they pay for our publications. Great, make that the metrics. Because if you bring in more people who can resonate with those readers, you can bring in more of those readers.
Gotcha. I appreciate that, Melissa. I love the passion. You definitely have got the passion on. I appreciate that. To again, because I know I want to get into some Q&A as well with our folks that are here. Anybody else have any kind of insight into the metrics piece? And again, whether it's from a candidate perspective or from a supplier perspective, or even from a legal perspective, if there's something that, you know, companies should be doing or should not be doing as they're capturing metrics as well.
Melissa, she pretty much covered it. I love your passion too, Melissa. I'm just that excited as well. But when thinking about diversity metrics and things like that, first, metrics, analytics, those are buzzwords in, job descriptions today. Metrics are nothing without accountability. There should be accountability in the metrics. So pay, when it comes to pay, so that things are equal and equitable. Recruitment metrics, of course, but in those recruitment metrics, what's the hiring manager submittal to offer ratio? What's the hiring manager interview to offer ratio? What's the offer acceptance ratio? Retention, and not only should that be organizationally, but different manager groups. If you're losing, 50%, 30%, any percentage of your employees, and a subset of those are diverse employees, there's a problem. We're going to have a conversation. So those are some of the metrics. Advancement, nothing like attracting diverse candidates and then you can't retain them and you don't advance them. You just keep them in the same position. They get no mentorship or anything like that to be successful in the organization. And then representation, you definitely want to have those metrics. Your metrics, your analytics should tell a story. And tell a story to do something with it. So it should always drive stepping stones to get better. So sometimes companies just like to collect metrics and do analytics, but not doing anything with those. That's a problem. So metrics are great. And there's a plethora of metrics that you can analyze and provide, but it's nothing without accountability between leadership, the organization, and people that hire employees.
I know, leadership is definitely, we talked about, at Beck as well, we talked about it before, it's going to be that leadership has to be committed to diversity. I mean, that's a key component as well. I want to open this up to Q&A. I know we're coming up at the top of the hour, and there's a couple of things that we have to finish up before we do close today, but I do want to open this up to some Q&A. We did have a question that popped up earlier, and it was around, for Tim, would you work with diverse chambers of commerce? Is there any issues working with diverse chambers of commerce?
Diverse Chamber of Commerce, meaning like NGLCC. We partner with the Dallas Chamber, the Plano Chamber of Commerce. So, do we have any problems? No, doing that? No, we don't, because actually we already do. So, Disability In, we partner with, veterans owned business enterprise, we partner with. So, hopefully we cover the spectrum there from that perspective.
Gotcha.
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Uh-huh.
Doug, from your end, did you have some additional questions as well?
No, I just wanted Tim to state which chambers of commerce that he works with, since he doesn't work with the ERGs. He does work with the Chamber of Commerce. In particular, it's how I even know him is through the through connections to the LGBT Chamber of Commerce.
Gotcha. Okay. And then again, if you've got a question, anybody here that's in attendance, or all of our participants, you can ping us here on the Q&A. Let us know from that piece of it there. At the end of the day, we talked about the leadership piece. Ultimately, what sort of advice would you give the folks that are here listening to us today to educate their leaders to be committed to diversity? If you had to kind of sum it up in 1 minute, I mean, it's a big question, I know, but how would you sort of educate the leaders within their organizations so that they're committed to diversity? Tim, I'll kind of start with you.
Sure. Yeah, happy to try to answer that. As I mentioned before, it's really part of our culture, but it doesn't get done by culture itself. I think one of the things that helps is having the accountability piece there, and that accountability piece comes through maybe some type of scorecard, if you will, or maybe some type of personal D&I commitment where they maybe try to become an ally. So rather than being a leader and being in front of everybody, maybe they're standing alongside them, of people that don't look like them, that don't act like them. So I think that would be a move in the right direction. I also talked about kind of the feel-good moments. I know we can't walk the halls anymore of our campus, but if we could, but we can still do it virtually, right? We can make people feel inclusive virtually through being on video rather than not, and to be able to be transparent and listening to people's voices and their opinions and their thoughts, diversity of thought, and just allowing people, as we've all said today, to be themselves, to be their authentic selves, which ultimately, improves productivity and raises the brand, and et cetera, et cetera. So
Gotcha.
Those would be my comments. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Tim. Thank you. And to anybody else, again, a quick minute before we end up and wrap up the session, but any last thoughts on kind of...
David, I got a question that's coming from one of the members.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
And this will probably be directed towards Dustin, but I'm not sure. The question is, what would you say about recruiters being told to guess diversity, both race and gender, and maybe providing those statistics up to their stakeholders? So their question is, what would you say about that? Being asked to guess diversity, both gender and race, and providing that information to the stakeholders?
I would say no. I could go on and on at length. I know we're short on time. My short answer is no. I just don't see any benefit there. All I see is downside, with potential discrimination claims that you've already made your decisions about who someone is or what they're going to be because of their gender or their race, or there are so many minefields and potholes there. I'd have a heart attack if one of my clients told me they were doing that. So I would say no.
Perfect. Thank you.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And again, final thoughts on sort of the tips or, you know, best advice to give those the leaders that are looking and committed to diversity? Camille and Melissa?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Camille.
Don't be quiet. I remember earlier in my career, you know, I would see stuff going on and I wouldn't say anything because, oh, I need my job, this and that. Hey, I have 15 years in the game. I'm going to be that squeaky wheel. So if you guys need confidence, just talk to me because I am not afraid to speak my mind if it's what's right. You know, we need to challenge our leaders. This is important. Having a diverse and inclusive workforce makes your company more productive. You get better results on the bottom line. Why wouldn't you want to do it? And so, you know, I would say hold leaders' feet to the fire. You know, if you see them out there saying different things about diversity and inclusion and they're not walking what they're talking internally, send them a note. You know, make it professional, but, you know, you have to say something. And that's for people that, you know, maybe, you know, you're an ally and you're not a person of color or, you know, a person of a different background. If you look around and see something wrong, speak up. Don't stay silent. It's not that time. And Dustin will tell you retaliation. I mean, that they can't do that. So if you're being professional, you're highlighting facts, you're doing it with tact. There's nothing wrong with speaking up and holding leadership or your manager or, you know, making them accountable for their actions and their words. And so that's what I would say is
Gotcha.
speak up and use your voice.
Melissa, 30 seconds.
Yeah, if you're going to be a change agent in the organization, which is a fantastic but not an easy task, and that is what we all need to be as DEI advocates, the more you can align with who you're trying to persuade, the better. So it's not about what you need them to see. It's not about doing the right thing. There are some who will be convinced by that, but unfortunately, it's not too common. But they do have their own metrics, their own things for how they're going to be celebrated, how they're going to be promoted, how they're going to get that next huge compensation check, aligned to what their priorities are, and it will allow you to push your priorities through. So know your audience before you make your case and then cater your case to that audience. There is always an angle because DEI is valuable in every facet that you can think of. So pick the right one.
Appreciate that. Appreciate it. Thank you, panel. I appreciate it. Doug, I know we're coming up at the top of the hour. We do have one last thing that we typically do here at DFWTRN. Doug?
Yep. Okay. So first I want to say thank you, Melissa, Tim, Camille, Dustin. We appreciate your time very much. I want to let you guys know, all the members online here, that we did a drawing during the presentation, and we've got 4 members, and we're giving out individual memberships to those individuals. That's going to be Angie Thompson with Cognizant, Eli Hernandez with Pretty Mobility, Jennifer Fisher with ATB Furnished Housing, and Latrice Redding with Caliber Home Loan. So I want to thank y'all very much, and we appreciate everyone's time today, and we'll see y'all next month.
Yeah, thank you, panel. We appreciate it, and thank